My name's Josh Pachter. I'm the editor of the Great Filling Station Holdup, crime fiction inspired by the songs of Jimmy Buffett. And the original plan was that we were going to kick things off after Neil's introduction with a performance of the title song from the book by Don Bruns. I'm not sure if Don is here. Don, if you are, can you unmute yourself and strum us some music? Giving Don a chance to check in here. We may have to put that off until a little bit later. It looks like some of us were having, and I think it was probably entirely my fault, having some trouble getting logged into the session this evening. So I apologize for that. I know Don is trying to get in, and when he's able to get in, we'll bring him in and we'll let him play some music for you, so you get to listen to some of the music that inspired the title song for this book. So let me do a couple of thank yous. Thank you to Broward College for hosting us this evening. Especially thank you to Regine and Bibi for your work putting this event on. Also special thanks to Neil Plaxey, who made this happen, although he's having some connection problems right now. His brain is working just fine. And it's because of Neil that we were able to make this event happen as a part of BC's festival this year. Also, thank you to all of the contributors to the book, those who are able to join us this evening. There are a couple who, for a couple of different, mostly health-related reasons, are very sorry to not be able to be here, although they had originally planned to be. Thank you to everybody in the audience for taking time out of your Thursday evening to join us, and especially thanks to Jimmy Buffett, who wrote the wonderful songs on which the 16 stories in the Great Filling Station Holdup are based, and of course dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of other songs. Music inspires us. It inspires us to sing, inspires us to dance. Music inspires us to work harder and faster and better in the gym. And for those of you who are BC and other students, it inspires us to work better when we're studying and when we're doing our homework. For some of us, the folks who are here this evening as contributors to the book, music inspires us to write. About a year ago, I edited a collection called The Beat of Black Wings, crime fiction inspired by the songs of Joni Mitchell. And that book was a lot of fun to put together. It sold pretty well, and I found myself thinking, well, let's do another one. And I had to figure out, well, who would be the singer-songwriter who would inspire the stories contained in the next volume? And Jimmy Buffett, for me, was a very obvious choice. I've been a Buffett fan since the early 70s. There's somebody with a mic open. Can I ask you to mute your mic, please? Lee London, I think that might be you. There we go. Thank you, Lee. So Jimmy Buffett was a pretty obvious choice for me. The first question I really had to answer was, what do we call the book? And there were two songs that Buffett has written that really jumped out as possible titles. One was A Cuban Crime of Passion, and then the other one was The Great Filling Station Holdup. Now, on the Joni Mitchell book, I took the initiative to write the title story for the book, and I thought, well, I have to do that with the Jimmy Buffett book too. So I thought, which one of those two songs do I want to turn into a story? Well, I've never been to Cuba, but I have been to a lot of filling stations. So I decided to name the book The Great Filling Station Holdup and to take that song on as my own. So before I introduce to you the authors and give each of them the opportunity to take a couple minutes to tell you about their story and how the song it was based on inspired it, let me just check back again and see. Don Bruns, have you gotten here yet? Going once? Going twice? Not yet. Okay, well, I'm sorry about that. Let me mention, as Neil promised, by the way, that the good folks at Down and Out Books, who are the publishers of the Great Filling Station Holdup, have graciously offered us the opportunity to give you a nice 20% discount if you would like to buy a copy of the book, or if you've already got a copy, it makes a great holiday gift if you want to buy more. In order to buy the book, what you need to do is you need to go to the Down and Out Books website, which is just, it's simple to find. It's downandout.com. downandoutbooks.com. And if you go to that website, you'll see, you should see it on your screen now. We have a beautiful banner right here advertising the book. If you click on that banner, it will take you to the page from which it becomes possible to order the book. And as you go through the ordering process, all you have to do when you get to the point is use this code, Jimmy20. And that is case sensitive. It is a lowercase j, Jimmy20. And we'll get that into the chat for you at least a couple of times during the course of the evening. Okay, so that all said, I'm going to begin to introduce the authors to you in the order in which their stories appear in the book. And again, not all of them are able to be with us, so I'll mention those when we come to them. And then each author, please do take a couple minutes to tell us about your story and the song and how they interconnect. When everybody's had a chance to say hi and greet you, what we're going to do is we'll open the floor up to your questions, and hopefully we will be able to answer them. You might also want to pop questions into the chat, and I think that Regine and Bibi and Neil will all be keeping track of those so that they can help to get those questions asked when we reach the question portion of the program. So Jimmy Buffett's first album was released 51 years ago in 1970, a record called Down to Earth. And from the Down to Earth album, author Lee London, that's the fellow on your screen in the cowboy hat, selected the song Truck Stop Salvation. So Lee, let me turn it over to you. Tell us about your story.
And everybody, speakers, please remember to unmute.
Lee, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Great.
Lee, there you go, Lee. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Josh. When Josh first asked me to do a story, I panicked. I find it hard to do stories on demand, and yet I so wanted to. But as the deadline for a decision came, I just had nothing. And finally, I was chatting with my brother, and he made one of his wise-ass comments, and it triggered something, and I remembered hearing a Jimmy Buffett song off of his very first album. And when Josh said it was more than a half century ago, I couldn't believe it. But I found there were a number of things on that first album that were very interesting. And one of the songs on that was called Turnabout, just a lovely little song on that. But the one that finally caught me was this one called Truck Stop Salvation. It was a tricky song, and I felt like I might have known some of the people in it, the bullying sheriff and the judgmental townspeople. And mostly I like small towns, but there always has to be one or two to spoil things. And once I hit upon it, then there was what I'm thinking of as a Southern Gothic story that came to mind, and it was pretty dark. It's a love story, but a very dark love story. And I make mention of Romeo and Juliet and Paolo and Francesca in it. So there's some very dark elements in it. And I was a little relieved when I read some of the other stories that some of those took a dark turn as well. But I found it interesting and challenging to bring those elements of mystery and romance and evil together. And so that's how Truck Stop Salvation came about.
Thank you, Lee. So as it happens, Jimmy Buffett's second album, A White Sport Coat and a Pink Crustacean, which came out in 1973, is the album that features the song The Great Filling Station Holdup, which is the story that I wrote for the book. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 2 cents in about how the story came out of the song. I knew obviously that this was a story that had to involve a gas station and had to involve a robbery at the gas station. And all I had to do was figure out where the story was going to be set, who the main characters were going to be, and how it would resolve. Piece of cake. The story gave me some good hints in the lyrics to the song. Are the lines, "We got $16 and a can of STP, a big old jar of cashew nuts, and a Japanese TV." And I thought, $16, that's really not enough of a haul to base a story around. So I turned the $16 into $600. That seemed like it was more reasonable amount to base a story on. And I had, not too terribly long before this project came about, written on demand a story for a book that was edited by one of the folks you'll meet in a little while tonight, Michael Bracken. Michael did a book called The Eyes of Texas, which are private investigator stories set in the great state of Texas. And I had created a American private eye with a German name, Helmut Earhart, for a story for that book. And I thought, well, you know, Helmut's a PI, he's in Texas, they have gas stations in Texas, including Texaco stations. Let me go ahead and have Helmut get hired to investigate the Great Filling Station Holdup, in which, in fact, a can of STP and a big old jar of cashew nuts get stolen in addition to the $600. I decided to leave out the Japanese TV. I also wanted it to be a story where it ends happily ever after for everybody, because Buffett's songs are often so lighthearted and fun. I didn't want anybody to walk away from this story in bad shape. So even the people who robbed the gas station wind up with a happy ending at the end of this story. So Jimmy's third album, A1A from 1974, includes a story called a song called "A Pirate Looks at 40" by Rick Ollerman. Rick was planning to be here this evening, but unfortunately he's having some health problems right now, and he emailed me with deep regret that he wasn't able to be here. But if you read the book, I think you're going to enjoy Rick's story. He really did a nice take on "A Pirate Looks at 40. We do have Michael Bracken, who I mentioned a moment ago, the editor of The Eyes of Texas. Michael took for his story the song Tampico Trauma from Buffett's next album, 1977's Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitude. So Michael, welcome, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Josh. I've been a longtime Buffett fan, not to the level of Parrot Head, but I've enjoyed and listened to his music for a great many years, and even have a songbook where I've tried to teach myself to play the stuff on the guitar, and nobody wants to hear that. So what I saw in Tampico Trauma was essentially the hint of a story, not a full story. It's about the narrator of the song gets in trouble with federales south of the border, and he does a lot of drinking. He's involved with several women, and he finally gets thrown out of the country. But that's only the gist of what's there. And I figure, well, what's the real story I can draw from those lyrics? So I have my protagonist has been running marijuana from Tampico to Texas as part of a crew that's been doing this for a while. And at one point, he finally decides he's done. And while in Tampico, he jumps off the ship with a shrink-wrapped cube of cash. And they shoot at him from the boat. They wound him. He washes up on shore, and he is rescued by 3 sisters. And so the story is about the 3 sisters. And it turns out their brother is a federale, and he has to walk a very fine line between the law and the sisters and the guy who has the boat who he's stolen the money from. And so it's kind of I went for essentially a wild ride for this guy. He's drinking, he's got these women, he's got all this money, and what's going to happen? And so that's what I worked through. I won't tell you how it turns out, but I will say it's a mostly happy ending.
Mostly happy ending. I think that's a fair way to put it, Michael.
Yeah.
Michael, thanks. Always a pleasure to see you. I'm looking forward to the day when we can see each other face to face again.
Oh,
and
yes.
The same goes for all of the contributors, most of whom I know face to face, some of whom I've only gotten to know via email and text messages. Jimmy's 1978 album, Son of a Sailor, and that is correct. It's, if you don't know the music of the records, it's Son of a Sailor. Includes one of Buffett's most well-known songs, a song called Cheeseburger in Paradise. And eventually Buffett's enterprises opened up, I think it was a couple of hamburger restaurants that were obviously called Cheeseburger in Paradise. Don Bruns took that song on as his contribution. And Don, I'm not sure, have you gotten here yet? I know Don is one of the ones who my bad was having trouble getting in. Hopefully he'll figure his way in, and we'll come back to him a little bit later on. Next up, from 1979, an album called Volcano, and the title song on that album, also called Volcano, was taken by Allison McMahon. And Allison, I know, also has been having some trouble getting in. Allison, have you made it in yet? You know, if this was live, I would ask people to slap me, because apparently the problem is that I sent around my entrance code to this event, and people who tried to get in using my entrance code are getting an error message saying you're already signed in. In fact, I had to sign in from a different email account in order to get in, because somebody else had already signed in ahead of me as me. But we do have a number of the other authors. Actually, I think most of the remaining authors are here. So let's move on, and if we can, we'll come back to Don and Allison later on. 1981, Buffett's Coconut Telegraph album features a story called Incommunicado, and I know that Bruce Robert Coffin, who wrote the story, is here. So Bruce, go ahead and take it away. Whoops, you disappeared, Bruce. There you are. And go ahead and unmute yourself.
There we go.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you guys? Okay, good.
Yeah, you're good.
So I was thrilled to death to get the communication from Josh about the fact that he was going to be doing a Jimmy Buffett themed anthology. Probably like everyone from my generation, we all know the Jimmy Buffett songs, and I probably, like Lee, I was a little apprehensive at the beginning because I was afraid I'd freeze up, actually have to write on demand. But given the choice of what to write about, it actually made it a little easier. One of my favorite Buffett songs, not the actual tune necessarily, but because of the lyrics, has always been Incommunicado. And for me, all of those little references, really, it's funny because what Jimmy Buffett does, and he almost really is writing country style music, which is known really for its storytelling. I mean, that is the one thing that separates it out. Country music, folk music, they're storytelling mechanisms. And so being able to use those prompts that were in that song, and they were great. I mean, there were, references to John D. MacDonald, who coincidentally is a mystery writer, was a mystery writer, and Travis McGee, his main character, all of the John Wayne, the Duke, all of those things that would make great prompts for a story. And as soon as I sat down and printed out the lyrics so that I could refresh my memory, I immediately found myself in the Arizona desert with an idea of where I wanted to take the story. And for me, one of the things I enjoy about the short story is that you have a very short period of time to do the setup. And I enjoy taking the reader down a road where they will feel comfortable that they're heading in a certain direction. And then, as I'm wont to do, pull the rug out from under them and have things go entirely different than you might imagine. So this was a great story to be able to do that with. And it's not a happy ending for everybody, that is for sure. I think one of the characters makes out okay, but the rest of them, not so much. So.
Well, since this is a collection of crime stories, Bruce, we had to have some in which not everybody lives happily ever after. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a crime anthology, would it?
Exactly.
Bruce, thank you so much for your wonderful story. I actually, I've edited a dozen or more anthologies over the years, and I think that the quality of the work in this one is as strong as in anything else I've ever done. I've looking back, not always been proud of every book I've edited, but this one I'm proud of. And that's entirely thanks to the contributions of Bruce and Michael and all the rest of the contributors who just really gave it their all for this book. Thank you all again so much. In 1983, Buffett released an album called 1981 rather, he released an album called Somewhere Over China. And one of my favorites, and one of my favorite Buffett songs is the one that Lisa Marie Redmond took from that album, a song called If I Could Just Get It on Paper, which is sort of the crime writer's lament all the way up and down the line, isn't it? Lisa, tell us about your story.
I was so thrilled to get the email asking if I wanted to throw my hat in the ring for this anthology. And it just happened to be on Super Bowl weekend last year. And as we were driving, we had rented a house with a bunch of people and went out and watched the game. And as we were driving home, I was so jazzed because I love Jimmy Buffett. And I was going through the different songs in my head, and we were listening to music and we were rocking it out. And the song just spoke to me because it's so deliciously vague. This person is sitting on the Sea of Cortez and had this fantastic night, and he just can't wait. He has to tell someone what happened, what he did. And there's, like Bruce said, there's these great little writing prompts. He mentions Faulkner, he mentions the Sea of Cortez, he mentions the squid and the kid. And I loved being able to weave all of that into a story that I hoped would sort of capture the message of Jimmy Buffett's music, that sort of, life is good even when it's bad. And so I didn't want anyone to get hurt. And I came up with a heist of a football pool from a bar in Key West. So my story's set in Key West. And I have to say, of all the short stories I've written, this one was definitely the most fun to write, because just the spirit of Jimmy Buffett and his storytelling is just this love of life. Some of it's magic, some of it's tragic, but I had a good life along the way. He says in he went to Paris, and I just took that as my inspiration for this little story. And I hope that the joy of my writer in the end comes across as he's penning his confession about what actually happened to the Super Bowl pool money.
Thank you, Lisa. You mentioned that line, some of it's magic and some of it's tragic, but I had a good life all the way. And one of the things that's always really resonated with me about Buffett and his work is that some of the lines that he originated himself, some of the lines that he's taken from others, that just get into your head and become really sort of the captions for a life lived. And I think maybe more than almost any other caption line that Buffett ever used in a song was the title of a song from his next album, his 1983 album, One Particular Harbor. The line, "We are the people our parents warned us about." And I was delighted to see my friend Elaine Viets choose that song to base her story on. Elaine, I'm glad you're here this evening. It's good to see you. Tell us about your story and the song.
Good to see you, Josh. And I was excited to do this too. And what it did, what this anthology did, was it helped me get an idea that had been rattling around in my brain for a long time. My husband and I were living in Washington, D.C., and it was the dead of winter, and we hated the place. And we were going to move to Florida. And I thought I was never going to make it through that winter. So I kept playing Jimmy Buffett songs over and over again. And we were still a little worried about living in Florida full time. So we thought, okay, if we can survive August in Florida, then we can live there year round. So we rented a place in a really fancy neighborhood right on the water. And it was owned by a fireman, and his wife was a postal worker. And this spread was incredible. And they also had a cottage that they rented out, and they had a cabin cruiser. And I had a pretty good idea what civil servants made, and I was real sure it wasn't enough to live in this area. So being nosy, I said, how do you afford this wonderful boat and this beautiful house? And she said, oh, you know, my father left the house to me, and we got the boat after Andrew. It had been condemned, and so we fixed it up. And I thought, okay. But I was still curious. And so one night, or one afternoon, I was always watching for the mail, because if you're a writer, you're always hoping for a check. And so the mailbox, the red flag went up, and I was out there like a shot. And I opened the mailbox, and inside the mailbox was the biggest bag of pot I have ever seen. I mean, that sucker was crammed. And so I looked at it and I threw it back in, but I also understood why they could now afford this lavish house and the boat. And so I made this into a story, and I had a good time with it. And it sort of has a happy ending, because it's about a man who was unappreciated all of his life in a really dull job. And he moved to Florida, and he encounters the same situation. And he becomes the person his parents warned him about.
Thank you, Elaine. I think maybe your story might be the one that is the most deeply rooted in real world scenarios of any in the book. Hey, this is probably a good time just to remind you, speaking of the book, as we have been, that if you're interested in picking up a copy or copies, you can get it directly from downandoutbooks.com at a 20% discount. Just when you're checking out, use the code Jimmy20. That's Jimmy with a lowercase j. The code is case sensitive. So Buffett's next album, 1984, Riddles in the Sand, which has always been one of my favorite album titles, has a great song on it called Who's the Blonde Stranger? Bob Randisi, Robert J. Randisi, wrote a lovely story inspired by that song. Bob was hoping to be able to be here with us this evening, but not for physical health reasons, maybe for mental health reasons. Bob Randisi, if you're unfamiliar with him, this guy, I'm not making this up, has already published more than 700 novels. That's a lot of novels. Michael Bracken and John Floyd, who are both here this evening, have each published over 1,000 short stories, but 700 novels, I think, even dwarfs those accomplishments. And Bob contacted me today and told me that he's up against not one, not two, but 3 novel deadlines. So he had to beg off because he's got 3 different books he needs to finish almost right away. So we're going to move on to Buffett's 1985 album, Last Mango in Paris, one of the all-time great puns. And from that album came a song called Everybody's on the Run. And we have Laura Oles with us here this evening. And Laura wrote a lovely story based on that song. Laura, tell us about it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Good evening, everybody. So I was thrilled to get the email from Josh about this anthology. And when I looked at some of the song options, for me, Everybody on the Run hit me right away, because for me, there were so many options with this song. And so one of the things that I did, the title did it, of course, but when I went through the lyrics, the first 2 lines are, first time I ran was to the end of the block. I didn't know then that it would never stop. And I sat with that for a little while and thought, well, what options would there be in terms of having something that was true to that song, but also in crime fiction? And honestly, I had to narrow some things down, but the idea that it would never stop, I thought, well, what about a family that's been in trouble for generations? And then What if you've got two siblings in particular who are currently on the run? So that was where my story began, was the story of Jax and Lex, who are brother and sister, who Jack takes a job that gets him into trouble. He gets in over his head and reaches out to his sister for help, because in their family dynamic, Lex is the string and he's the kite. She's always the one that's kind of pulling him back and keeping him grounded. In this particular story, they both end up in trouble. And so what I enjoyed was going through the lyrics and just kind of, these have such a wonderful, lighthearted sentiment to them, but they also touch on the deeper meaning of like always running and never standing still. And so for me, I enjoyed taking some of the sentiments of that and creating a world where we had two people who, the way I wanted to describe them was they're running from something and they're running towards something. And so that was some of the inspiration for that story. So I definitely played the song regularly and kept going back to the lyrics. It was fun to kind of use little moments of the dialogue or using little snippets of the song inspiration and weaving it throughout the story. It's kind of like an extra puzzle, figuring out how to do that authentically, that it's working with the characters. And I really tried to make sure that I took the story to the end. So as the end of the song goes all the way to the end, I'd like to think that the story ending also kind of honors that as well.
Thank you, Laura. So in 1988, Buffett's Hot Water album came out, and one of the, another, I guess, of the great song titles. This was one I was hoping that somebody would pick, and Isabella Maldonado did, and wrote a story based on the song Smart Woman in a Real Short Skirt. And right there, that's just such an evocative title. Isabella, tell us how that got you into the writing of your story.
Well, first of all, I think you almost had to have a woman write the story. And also part of the fun for me in choosing this and picking this story was that I wanted to inhabit a person that Jimmy Buffett was talking about, except I wanted to take it a step further. And the way I envision this is a truly despicable person who I had as my lead character, Donovan Snell. And he's a gun runner out of Miami. And in his mind, he sees women in two categories. He looks at them as they're either beautiful or they are smart. He cannot perceive of a woman that is both. And so in the beginning of the story, he laments that he can't take a shaker and mix up a woman who has beauty and brains. And actually that's in his lyrics. He talks about beauty and brains, best of both worlds, think I can change. So he just wishes that he could find a woman who in his mind had both, and he never seems to be able to find them. But then again, because he's a despicable human being, he continually just goes after, the kind of woman that he thinks is just attractive. So when I was talking to Josh about this, Josh gave me a challenge, and he said, if you can get the words bimbo limbo into your story, I would love that. So I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, this is a challenge. And but I managed to do it. But I realized once I had that as my challenge of having a character actually say something like that, that's when I knew I was dealing with a horrible human being. So Donovan Snell really, once I knew that, he's got to be dreadful. So and then what's a really despicable thing to do is to sell guns to criminals, and so that's of course that is what he does. And so I had a lot of fun with this in that everybody in the story turns out to be someone other than who they appear to be. There's all kinds of double crosses and triple crosses and back and forth, and you're never sure who's doing what. And then I also had a lot of fun with the term hot water, because that's the name of the album. And so I decided to make that the name of a yacht that appears toward the end of the story. So our character, our lead character, ends up, and then some of the other ones, literally in hot water in aboard the yacht. So I had some fun pulling in all the different things with it. And one of the things also in his lyric, he talks about that he's looking for a woman who knows how to flirt. So I made sure that the woman was very flirty. And yes, I did make sure she was in a short skirt, like a real short skirt, because I had to do that. And I also wanted to give it some Latin flair. So I made one of the lead characters to be Latina. So I had some fun doing that. And it was a lot of fun, and being able to play off of it and riff off of it, and have the enjoyment of being able to trick people and to trick the bad guy, and then hopefully pull the wool over the reader's eyes a little bit. It was a lot of fun.
That's kind of an expression that we've heard a number of times already this evening, Isabel. A lot of the authors just had a great deal of fun writing their stories for this book. And I think it really shows in the book. The stories were fun to write, but they also are fun to read. Now, some of them are fun to read in a pretty dark way. Many of them are fun to read in a much lighter way, but I think all of them are really enjoyable. Before we go on to the next author, let me just mention a couple of quick things here. First of all, for those of you in the audience who have Spotify, I have just put into the chat a Spotify link that will take you to a playlist of the 16 Buffett songs that inspired the 16 stories in the Great Filling Station Holdup. So you might want to copy that link and paste it someplace where you can access it later. And hopefully that will be a great soundtrack for you to read the book by, and drive to work by, and work out by, and study by, and so on. And I should also mention that one of the things that I'm doing with these inspired by books, this is the second one I've done, but the third one's coming out next month, stories inspired by the songs of Billy Joel. And with all of these, what I'm doing is, with the cooperation of the wonderful, generous authors, we're donating a third of all of the royalties that are generated by the projects to charities that are supported by the singer-songwriter who inspired us. And so for the Jimmy Buffett book, what we've actually wound up doing is we're splitting the donation in half, and we're giving a third, a half of a third, what is that, a sixth of the royalties to Singing for Change, which was founded by Jimmy Buffett and former Florida Governor Bob Graham. And then a sixth of the royalties are going to the Save the Manatee Club, which is also something that Buffett co-founded, and a cause very dear to his heart. So let's get back to our authors. In 1989, Buffett had another wonderful pun-titled album, Off to See the Lizard. Of course, he would title an album that. And from that album comes a song called The Pascagoula Run. The story was written by Jeffrey Hess. Jeff, tell us about it.
All right. Well, hey, first of all, I want to thank Josh, not only for editing a great anthology, but also being a great editor, and also Neil for hooking this up, and everybody that's involved on that end of things. You know, I've edited a couple of anthologies myself. I don't know how much work goes into that, so it's very much appreciated, and I'm happy to participate in this, because like everybody's been talking about, it was a lot of fun. And you know, Buffett is near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons, and I kind of prepared something to keep me on track. So I grew up in Southwest Florida, close to the Gulf of Mexico beaches in the 1970s and 80s. And these were festive places back then where music was blasted from bars and from boom boxes. Often it was Jimmy Buffett music, as you might imagine, right? A girl I dated in high school had a poster of Jimmy Buffett on the back of her bedroom door, right? And so he was kind of a hero to me all my life. And so I admired him for doing his thing his way and having fun doing it. He just always came across as that. And so I was stationed in Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1987 when I was in the Navy. And I got to see Buffett play in Biloxi in August of that year. And so, you know, Pascagoula is where he was born, Biloxi, you know, as, you know, a big part of his life. So it was a mesmerizing event to me to be finally in the presence of all the parrot heads and everybody. So being half drunk, at least, I was amazed by the crowd just as much as I was by Buffett's performance himself. So there I was, a Navy sailor on Liberty in a crowd of tens of thousands of people, some of them my age, some of them grandparents, some of them with their grandchildren, all celebrating the cause to get together to enjoy this show. So a few years later, I worked through the second half of college bartending in a Florida-themed bar and grill called A1A Cafe. Coincidentally, right? So this bar was designed to replicate the stern of a fishing boat, and Buffett music played almost constantly. I knew every song by heart, even while counting change or cutting limes or performing towel tricks for bar guests or pouring trays of drinks. Buffett music always played. Also some reggae, but it was mostly Buffett. So perhaps since I was stationed in Pascagoula at that time, even though it was a couple of years before the song came out, I always had a connection to that song, the Pascagoula Run. And so just not only the title, but the content, it just really struck me. So having lived there and having grown up in that little Southwest Florida town near the Gulf of Mexico, I always wanted to go on an adventure. That's probably why I joined the Navy, right? So, but like Jimmy in the song, as well as Jimmy the singer, I got a taste of the vibe of the flavor of Pascagoula at that time, and I kind of thought that's an interpretation that I would take with the story. So he was presented with the chance to cross the wild meridian, and as a crime writer, I took it upon myself to take the scenario to the next level. And so I was honored to write a story that helped him complete that journey. And as a crime writer, writing about a 16-year-old kid who is mixed up with an uncle, I took liberties, but it was a lot of fun to do. And I included 2 hit women, and things got a little bit crazy, as they tend to do. But it was a great experience, and I'm really pleased to be a part of all of this.
Jeff, thank you so much for your story, and also thank you for your service in the Navy.
Oh, happy to do it. Thank you for paying your taxes.
Yeah, I would say I'm happy to do that, but let me just say I do that. So after Off to See the Lizard, which had the Pascagoula Run on it, Buffett took almost a decade away from releasing new music. And when he came out with his next album 9 years later in 1998, it was an unusual album. It was called Don't Stop the Carnival. And what it was basically was a Broadway musical based on the novel Don't Stop the Carnival by Herman Wouk. And the characters in the story of the musical sing the songs on the album. It was a very interesting album. And because it was an album of new Buffett music, I wanted to include it in the book. And our host this evening, Neil Plaxey, wrote the story Public Relations from that album. Now, I've mentioned a couple times already tonight that Buffett sometimes used puns for the titles of his albums, Off to See the Lizard, Last Mango in Paris. Neil was really the one contributor who turned that on its head a little bit and gave us a pun or a double entendre, at least, in the title of the story that he wrote, based on from Don't Stop the Carnival, the Buffett song, which was not a pun title, Public Relations. Neil, I hope that your audio is working well now. Go ahead and let's find out.
Okay. Can you hear me? Am I breaking up?
So far, so good.
All right. So I too loved writing this story. I've been a big Buffett fan, a big parrot head for 30 some years since I moved to Florida. I've seen him in concert a bunch of times, always a really fun event. And I saw Don't Stop the Carnival in its pre-Broadway run at the Coconut Grove Playhouse in Miami, and bought the album, bought the CD, loved it. So when Josh asked me what album and what song I would like, I went through a couple that had already been taken, but then came to Public Relations. And I have a friend who's a PR guru from New York, so I've heard a lot about that business from her and her husband. And immediately I thought of the double entendre of someone having relations in public. And then that's where the crime came from. And it's not particularly not a big deal crime to have sex with someone and have it recorded unknowingly and then put up on the internet. Yes, it's a crime, but it's not something the police are going to come chasing after. However, when it is the married president of a company that makes a line of male condoms, who is caught barebacking online or having public relations, that's a big PR nightmare. And it was a lot of fun for me to put together the circumstances and to use a lot of the words and phrases from the song. And that's where Josh's editing magic came in, because I submitted the first draft to him and he wrote back and said, "Oh, you've done a great job of giving the Buffett atmosphere and adding lyrics in. But remember, this is a crime story. There needs to be a crime at the heart of it." So that's the kind of thing that an editor can really do for you. I know I have a couple students in the audience, and I want to remind them that nothing you write is finished the first time around, that it always should go to an editor who can always help you make things better, as Josh did with this story. So thank you, Josh.
You are welcome, Neil, and thank you for being open to the idea of being edited. It's been my good fortune to work almost exclusively with people who appreciated the fact that an editor has more of a job to do than putting in the missing commas. So I've been very gratified to be taken seriously in my role as more than just a comma guru. Thanks again, Neil. So, after Jimmy came out with Don't Stop the Carnival, the next year, 1999, 10 years after his previous album of non-based on a novel music, he came out with a new album called Beach House on the Moon. And these were all songs that Buffett wrote himself and in collaboration, as he has often done throughout his career, with some of the musicians with whom he enjoys working. The prolific John Floyd took on from Beach House on the Moon the song Spending Money. And John is here. John, come on and tell us about the song and the story.
Okay, well, first, as others have said, this story was great fun to write, Josh. I had a great time with this. And as far as inspiration goes, I think part of it was the title and also some of the lyrics where it was talking about, extra money, spending money. How do you go about getting that? And this is a mystery crime anthology. So I had to think in terms of maybe a way to acquire some money that was less than honorable. And I came up with kind of a smug con man who he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. And he has managed to get by in life by being funny and charming. But the truth was he was a cheat and a liar and a crook. So I had him come up with a scheme that, of course, backfired on him in a way that I hope was interesting or satisfying to readers. And it was really, really a lot of fun to write this story. I had such a good time, I believe, mostly because it was 95% dialogue. The action happened off screen, and the whole thing was a conversation between two people at a table in a restaurant on a rainy day. And as almost any writer will tell you, dialogue is just great fun to write. So I just really had a good time. Also, as others have said, I was just thrilled and honored to be a part of this anthology. I live 2 hours from Pascagoula in Biloxi, and I'm crazy about Jimmy Buffett and always have been. So I think this is really an honor to be in this lineup.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to work with you, because you had one of the last stories in the book. You had to wait one of the longest amounts of time to speak this evening. I assume that while you've been waiting, you've written 4 more stories.
Oh yeah, I've got 2 or 3 going here.
And I also assume that because he was one of the earlier people to participate, since his turn, Michael Bracken has also written 3 or 4 more stories. So I think this event is probably responsible for half a dozen stories that people who read crime fiction will be reading in the not too distant future. So in 2013, after an absence of 14 years, not from the concert stage, Jimmy Buffett, like Billy Joel, has never stopped performing until COVID. But after 14 years of not releasing an album of new music, in 2013, Jimmy came out with Songs from Saint Somewhere. And one of the songs on that album has got just, I think probably my second favorite title of any song ever recorded by anyone. My favorite probably being Paul Simon's Renee and Georgette Magritte with their dog After the War. The Buffett song from Songs from Saint Somewhere was Einstein Was a Surfer. And that story was written by Mickey Browning, who writes as M.E. Browning. And Mickey was hoping to be able to be here this evening, but I don't see her in the list of participants. And so it looks to me like she wasn't able to make it. At the time that I was putting the book together, that was the most recent Buffett album. And so that's where I stopped with Einstein Was a Surfer. But wouldn't you know it, while I was putting the book together, Jimmy came out with one more recent album, and it was too late to get a story based on one of those songs in the book. So I think that'll probably have to wait for the sequel, A Human Crime of Passion, which I'll have to do next. So anyway, we have now gone through all the folks who are here tonight. Don Bruns, unfortunately, has not shown up. Allison McMahon, unfortunately, has not shown up. And I knew that Rick Ollerman wasn't going to be able to make it for health reasons, knew that Mickey probably wouldn't be able to be here, but you've had a chance to hear from a dozen of us. So what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to open the floor up to questions. So if you have a question either for one of the contributors or for all of us, you can go ahead and put that into the chat window. And while you're typing into the chat window, I will go ahead and get you looking at it by putting up once again the Spotify link for the playlist of the 16 songs. I see in the chat, not a question, but Rob Lepresti is complimenting my shirt. I meant to write to all of the contributors and suggest that you wear an Aloha shirt for tonight, but it slipped my mind. I forgot to do it. So it's just me. I wish I had one with parrots on it, because Buffett fans are generally, I think probably a lot of people know they're often called parrot heads. These are not parrots, they're toucans. You may not be aware while you're typing your questions in the chat window that there's also another name for sort of the Ne plus ultra Buffett fans. They don't call themselves parrot heads, they call themselves cooler heads. And if you go to a Buffett concert, you will see people wearing a styrofoam cooler with a hole cut out of the bottom on their heads. Now, why in the world cooler heads? Well, perhaps obviously when you think about it, because as we know, cooler heads will prevail. And so that became a nickname for the people who'd gotten past parrot head dumb into a higher plane. So, okay, we do have a question in the chat, and it looks like this one is probably for me. Kayla asks, what drove you to make a novel inspired by music? Why Jimmy Buffett in particular for this one? Well, first of all, Kayla, let me just mention that this is technically not a novel. It's an anthology, a collection of short stories. A novel would be a full-length work where from page 1 to page however many, one basic story with possible subplots is being told. In this book, each of the 16 stories has its own completely separate cast of characters, and the stories don't relate to each other in any way other than the fact that each of them was inspired by a song written by Jimmy Buffett. Why Buffett in particular for this one? I've had people suggest other songwriters and bands that do their own original music as subjects for such an anthology. I just the other day got an email, I think it was from Lee London, who's here, suggesting that I should do one based on the songs of Queen. And I have to say that for me, if I'm going to spend a year working on a book, and for the contributors, some of them, Michael Bracken, John Floyd, it takes them 20 minutes to write a short story. Some of the other contributors, it might take a week, a month, a couple of months to write a short story. Different people have different lengths of time it takes him to get a piece of writing done. And depending on the piece of writing, the same writer, one story, it might take a week, and the same writer might take 2 months on a different story. But as the editor of the book, I knew this was going to take up a year of my time. And if I'm going to devote a year of my time to a songwriter, I want it to be a songwriter whose music I'm happy to listen to for that year. And as far as I'm concerned, no offense intended, but a little bit of Queen goes a long, long way. Probably my very favorite singer-songwriter is Joni Mitchell, and that's why I approached her first. And I would say that Buffett is my second favorite. And so that's why I went with Buffett next. I'm looking ahead to possible other ones now, and there's a balancing act you have to do here, because on the one hand, it has to be somebody whose music speaks to me, but on the other hand, it has to be somebody whose music speaks to you, because if you don't know and like the songwriter, it becomes less likely that you're going to want to buy the book. So I mean, for example, one person I would love to do is a guy who I suspect that some of you have heard of, but many have not, a fellow named Dan Hicks, who had a band called Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. And Dan he died about 2 years ago. Dan was a brilliant songwriter who told little miniature stories in song. I think he would make a great book, but I'm not sure anybody would really buy it other than me. So Jimmy, just on a couple of different levels, was an obvious choice. A person whose music I love, and a person who enough other people love that I thought the book would sell. And in fact, on the gigantic e-tailer who shall not be named, who is not offering you a 20% discount on the book should you decide to buy it, both the ebook version and the paperback version are ranked pretty high right now for mystery anthologies. They're both up around somewhere around the top 100 or 110 or so anthologies that the Zahn is marketing right now. Elaine is suggesting Leonard Cohen, and you know, somebody ought to do that book, Elaine. Maybe you should do it, but he's just not one of the people who has spoken to me. Paul Simon is also just now in the chat been suggested, and that's one I would love to do. Paul Simon is on my list for a future volume if somebody else doesn't get there first. So while we're looking to see if additional comments and questions get put into the chat, can I invite the participants to unmute yourselves and add in other thoughts that you forgot to say first time around, but would like to add now? Don't leave me hanging here, writers. You're word people. Use your words.
Well, Josh, I wanted to jump in. Something that I put into the comments about, even though we think of Jimmy as a Florida writer or Florida singer-songwriter, and many of us are Florida writers, so many of the stories don't take place in Florida. That was something that surprised me. Did that surprise you when you started getting the stories?
You know, I was hoping that would happen, Neil, and I was glad when it did happen. As I started putting together a list of people I wanted to contribute to the book, one of the things that was important to me was to get about half the book be stories written by Floridians. And in fact, I think I might have hit that almost exactly. If you count Allison McMahon, who was a Floridian when she wrote the story, but now is in New Hampshire. And if you count me, who lived in Florida just long enough to find out that Bette Midler was right when she called it God's waiting room. And at that point, I moved west of state to New Orleans and then onward from there. But yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to put any kind of a stricture on the settings for the stories. I was making enough demands as an editor already that the story had to be based on a song, that you couldn't quote lyrics from the song, but you could and in fact should use imagery from the song. I didn't want to tie it down to place, but I was hoping and was glad that the stories were not all or even nearly all set in Florida. Some of the settings, like Michael's setting south of the border, and Allison, who wrote Volcano and set it in another part of the world that has volcanoes. Some of the settings are pretty far afield, but of course, Jimmy has been a peripatetic kind of a guy. You know, he's known as a Floridian, but he's also known as a Caribbean, and he's also known as an Alabaman, and he's also known as a Louisianan. He's got roots in a whole lot of different places.
Well,
So go ahead.
And I think Nashville too, because of kind of his whole country.
Any
Yeah,
last?
you just froze up again, Neil. Can you try that again? Now you're open.
Oh, I'm just saying Nashville also, because I
Right.
know he has lived there and recorded there too.
Yeah. And Michael, you had, I think, your mouth open to say something there.
Yeah. Well, with Tampico Trauma, it's clearly the song is set in Tampico, Florida, Tampico, Mexico. So my setting was pretty much mandated by the title and the setting of the song. Unless there's a Tampico somewhere else in the world, I was stuck in Mexico.
Well, you almost said Florida there. I think you were thinking of Tampa, right? So we have a question in the chat really for everybody, and I'd like as many of you as would like to take a crack at this. This is from Joe Walker. He says, as you're working on these stories, how often do you go back to the song? Do you listen to it as you're writing? Do you print out the lyrics to refer to? So let's see if we can get a bunch of you to respond to that.
I already wrote my response in there, and yeah, I definitely printed out the lyrics and I referred to them often. I wanted to make sure that I stayed true to the spirit of the song, and often those clever turns of phrase that Buffett often puts in there. And then of course Josh's challenge to get bimbo limbo in there.
How could you not, right?
Yeah.
Others who would like to respond to that?
I did the same
Jeff.
thing with the concept of the uncle drives up in a red convertible 65, a Jaguar. It was just easy to run with that and just take off, and it was a lot of fun to do. So listen to the lyrics.
Yeah,
definitely,
I also printed out the lyrics and went back and referred to them a number of times, just to get those little images dropped in and little turns of phrase.
I printed out the lyrics and I listened to the music. It always puts me in a good mood when I'm writing.
I printed out the lyrics. Oh,
Go ahead, Lisa.
no, I printed out the lyrics and kept them next to my laptop as I wrote and referred to them often.
Now, I'll tell you this, as your stories came in, and I haven't said this to any of you before, but as your stories came in, before I opened them up and read them, what I did first was I printed out the lyrics to the song and read the lyrics before I read your story, because there were two important, well, actually really three important things that I was looking for. One, I wanted to make sure that you didn't do a lot of or as close as any quotation from the lyrics, because who wants a lawsuit for copyright violation?
Right.
Two, I wanted to make sure that it was justifiable to say at a visible to the reader level that the story was in fact inspired by the song. I never had any doubt but that you took the song as inspiration, but I wanted it to be clear to the reader that you did that. And then the third thing that I was looking for, as I mentioned a little while ago, is that I was looking for imagery from the song. So for example, when the song Bruce was talking about Incommunicado, which mentions the great late John D. McDonald and Travis McGee's Still on Cedar Key, I really wanted John D. McDonald to be mentioned somewhere in the story. I wanted Cedar Key mentioned somewhere in the story. So I was looking to see if those kinds of images were there. And in some cases, when they weren't, or when there weren't enough of them, one of the things as an editor that I would do is I would suggest to the author, maybe you could put a little more imagery from the song into the story. Do we have others who'd like to talk about that? Did you listen to the song? Did you print out the lyrics?
Yeah, I did both. It's just it was a helpful way to get into the mood, writing the song, writing the story, having that going in the background, seeing the lyrics. Any place where I felt like I needed something else to happen in the story, I would go to the lyrics and see what I could use that would help me get through that.
Anybody else? Well, I am not seeing other questions in the chat. I do see that Regine has asked that you would fill out a survey about this evening's presentation, and we would certainly appreciate it if you would be supportive of Broward College and its support of us by taking a few moments to go ahead and do that. I also, I want to ask each of the authors just to come on screen one more time and repeat your name, so that the folks who are in the audience who maybe haven't read your novels or your other work yet, but now that they've had a chance to hear you talk, would like to have the opportunity to do that. I'd like for them to know who you are. So I'm gonna just go back to the top again, and when we get to the people who aren't here, I will mention their names again. But just come back on screen for a moment and maybe just tell us the name of your latest book or your latest story, so that folks who want to can scribble that down and have the reading set for about the next year or so. Because if you read one book by each of these authors, that's going to keep you busy for a while. And I can tell you, having read all of these people, that they are worth reading more of. There isn't a writer in the bunch who isn't worth your additional exploratory reading time. So Lee, are you still here? I'm not seeing you on my screen.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely. So this is Lee London. Lee, spell it out for people.
It's LEIGH LUNDIN. And I just moments ago found the unmute button. So I wasn't able to contribute to the comments about printing out the song. I didn't print it out, but I referred back to it. And I was most interested in what came after the song. So I used the song in my first 2 or 3 pages of setup. But I started writing short stories I think it was in the midst of the 2004 hurricanes, something like that, here in Florida. And I got hammered. Every property I owned was damaged or destroyed. And I fought insurance companies. I had more lawsuits going. And it's astonishing. 4 hurricanes. And so the insurance companies that decided to pay up decided there should be 4 deductibles. And if you were doing repairs in between hurricanes, you know that went pretty fast. But I started writing. The first story was published in Ellery Queen, and it happened to win an award. I was published in Alfred Hitchcock. I was in one of the MWA anthologies, where they said my story, once again, was more a love story than a crime story. But I've sent some others into Alfred Hitchcock recently, and we'll see what might happen. I took inspiration from John Floyd and sent one into the Strand. So we'll see what happens with that market.
So hopefully we'll be seeing you in the mystery magazines more soon, Lee. Second contributor was me, and of course I hope that you will read and enjoy the Great Filling Station Holdup. If you like the concept of books inspired by music, then I refer you back to last year's The Beat of Black Wings, crime fiction inspired by the songs of Joni Mitchell. And on April the 20th, next month, will come out from Untreed Reads in ebook and paperback, Only the Good Die Young, crime fiction inspired by the songs of Billy Joel, and several of the contributors this evening are in that book as well. Rick Allerman, not with us this evening for health reasons. Rick is the editor of Down and Out, the magazine, which comes out a couple of times a year, publishes
His most
quality.
recent book,
Have you got the title of Rick's most
Bullets
recent?
and Other Hurtful Things, a tribute to Bill Kreider, another anthology. It just came out.
And that was edited by Rick. He didn't,
Edited by Rick.
yeah, it's a collection of short stories, not a novel, but he did a wonderful job of editing that book. And Bill Kreider, if anybody ever deserved an anthology dedicated to him, it was Bill Kreider, one of mystery fiction's sad losses in recent years. Michael, I mean, you could probably go on for about an hour telling us what you've got coming up, but give us the things to look for first.
First thing to look for is a story in the your upcoming anthology from Billy Joel. I've also got a story coming up in the next issue of Alfred Hitchcock's magazine. And I'm also an anthology editor in my most recent anthology, Mickey Finn, 21st Century Noir, came out a few months ago. It's the first in what is planned to be an annual series of Mickey Finns.
And if you enjoyed my story in the Jimmy Buffett book, that same Texas PI is in the next Mickey Finn 2, in a story for that book. Let's see, Bruce, what should people be looking for from you?
Right now, I'm currently working on the 5th John Byron novel, tentatively titled Under the Gun. I'm approaching the halfway mark on that manuscript, so hopefully something happens by the end of the year. And I also have another short story coming out some point here at the Writers Police Academy anthology that I think Lisa Gardner is editing. And I've got a story in there called Writer's Block. And coincidentally, that story I started 5 years ago, and it's been such a bear. It's taken me this long to write it. So it's aptly named for sure. And I think the anthology is called People Are Strange. So look for that as well.
Thank you, Bruce. And Lisa, how about you?
The 5th book in my cold case investigation series is coming out in July. And I am working on the 6th book as we speak in that series. And I wish I was as far as Bruce, but I'm only about a quarter of the way there. But I've got a little time to work on that. And I'm working on some short stories because it helps to clear out the cobwebs in between the novels.
Lisa, give us the title of the 5th one that is out.
The 5th one that's out now is called A Full Cold Moon.
A Full Cold Moon. Great, thank you. And Elaine?
My new, my 5th Angela Richmond death investigator novel is just out last week. It's called Death Grip. And so I'm hoping it does well, but I'm happy to see it out. And the 6th book is at my editor's, and I'm waiting for her judgment.
Elaine, hold that book up again, because I think it's great to see when the author's name appears above the title of the book. That tells you this is a writer who you should be reading. It goes all the way back to Frank Capra, whose autobiography was called The Name Above the Title. Right, Death Grip from Elaine Viets. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.
And Laura, how about you?
Okay, hello. I'm also working on a couple of other short stories. The 2nd Jamie Rush mystery novel will be out in the fall, called The Sound of Winter. The first one was Daughters of Bad Men. And then I'm currently partway through the 3rd one, still working on that as well.
Thanks, Laura. And Isabella, what should people who want to read more of you be looking for?
Okay, I had to unmute myself.
You're good now.
Okay, good. All right. So I just okay, so my book is out. It's The Cipher, and this one just came out in November. And the fun thing about this one is that it's going to be made into a feature film. Netflix picked up the option for it. It's going to be starring Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, as the lead character in here in The Cipher. And this is it's an FBI serial killer story where the FBI agent Nina Guerrera is going after a serial killer. And then in this one, this is the sequel, and you all are the first to see this. This is actually an arc. So you see the little thing there says ARC. So this isn't even out yet. This is going to be released in August, and these ARCs just came out. It's the sequel to the Cipher. And then I was very fortunate that I just signed another 2-book deal with my publisher to continue on with this series. So it's been doing really well. It's being translated into 15 languages, and it's really getting, it's a huge surprise to me. I am very humbled and blessed with the incredible reception that the Cipher has gotten, and the incredible amount of people that have really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Well, that's such exciting news, Isabella, that the Cipher is going to show up on Netflix, and I'm sure many of the people in the audience are extra specially excited about the idea of J-Lo being the person who was cast to play the lead part. If I'm correct, her production company is also producing. Is that right? Or
Yeah,
is that
that's right.
wrong?
It's Nuyorican Productions is the name of her production company, and they actually reached out to my agent, and they're like, "Hey, we're in love with this story," and they basically said we have to be the ones to make this into a feature film. So it was really cool.
Let's hope this will be the first in a series of films. That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
But to have one is awesome already. And for people in the audience who aren't familiar with the abbreviation, when Isabella held up the next book in the series and identified it as an ARC, there's some different ideas about what those 3 letters ARC stand for. Some people will tell you they stand for advanced reading copy, and some will say advanced review copy. But in any case, it's a book that isn't out yet, but is coming out in the foreseeable future. And these are some pre-release copies that are being made available for some people to read. So good luck with all of that, Isabel. That's exciting news. Jeff Hess, how about you?
Well, unmute myself there. So my new novel, the third in the, I don't know what it's being called, the Double H trilogy, the Scotland Ross trilogy. It's called Rough House, is coming out in May, also from Down and Out Books. That's been a culmination of years of work and a lot of insight into, again, the Florida writer side of me, because I write, some Navy side, some Florida writer side, but it's all crime related. It's all kind of noir related. That comes out in May. And also recently my novel No Salvation came out in audio, which Edison McDaniels narrated, which was a tremendous effort on his part. Came out just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm pretty happy about that as well. So again, the Navy side, the Florida crime side, it's all noir and crime related. So big news on that front. Down and Out Books, Rough House coming out in May.
Congratulations on those new publications, Jeff. And on the audiobook, not every book gets made into an audiobook. That's good
news.
For
sure. That's for sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Neil, you've got a couple things coming out.
Yep. Well, I have, first of all, I have to thank Michael Bracken, because I have a story coming out in an odd kind of a format. Maybe it's Guns and Tacos is the name of the series. And then there periodically some short stories or novellas grouped together under that. Michael, is that correct way of describing it?
It's a serial novella anthology series, a novella a month, each month for 6 months as standalones. Then they're grouped together in a pair of paperbacks.
Okay, thank you very much. I write a couple different series. The Mahu series, M-A-H-U, is an openly gay Honolulu homicide detective. So the first book in that series, called Mahu, probably the place to start. If you recognize my love of puns, my Golden Retriever series, starting with In Dog We Trust. All of the titles are puns on God phrases. And fortunately, I am up to 12 in that series and still have plenty of phrases left to work with. And I have the Angus Green FBI agent series. So there'll be a new book in each of those this year at some point.
something to look forward to, several somethings to look forward to.
Yep.
Thank you, Neil. And John, I got an email from John Floyd this morning or last night listing about the next 450 different things that he's got coming out. John, give us a taste here.
Now, I have stories in the current March, April issue of Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and in the current March, April Saturday Evening Post are the latest two short stories I have out, I believe.
And John, I know that you have released a number of collections of your short stories. Do you have one you would recommend as a good place to start?
I do. Yeah, my seventh one, my latest one, I guess, is The Barons. It's 30 of my mystery suspense stories, and I believe I have 7 of those collections of short stories.
And The Barons is great stuff. That's the one I've read the most recently, and very well done. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have pretty much come to the end of our evening.